No one bid on the dying horse at the Clovis auction, until a poor farmer raised his trembling hand with his last 5 cents. What followed hushed the town's scornful laughter. Eli Mercer, mocked for spending his final coin on a broken creature no one dared touch, saw something in the horse's weary eyes, a spark of unbroken spirit. The desert wind carried away the jeers, but not the bond forged in that moment. In a place where mercy had no value, their unlikely connection would rewrite everything. For the horse, for Eli, and for Clovis itself. The wind carried dust across the auction yard, sweeping through the corrugated metal barn like a ghost searching for something left behind. It was late afternoon in Clovis, New Mexico. Sky the color of pale tin, ground cracked open by drought. The crowd inside the barn shifted restlessly, their boots scuffing sawdust dampened with animal sweat and rain that never fell. A tired loudspeaker crackled overhead, and the auctioneer's voice dragged through static. Lot 49, 6-year-old gelding, no papers, fair condition. No one lifted a hand. The horse stood in the center pen, ribs visible under a dull gray coat. One eye half closed from infection, mane tangled with straw and soot. The poor thing barely breathed, yet somewhere deep inside its eyes flickered a stubborn ember. The crowd murmured, some with pity, most with the cold amusement of people who had seen too much loss to feel anything anymore. Starting bid, $10, the auctioneer tried again, his voice thin as wire. Silence pressed down, broken only by the groan of the roof and the distant sound of a gate swinging loose in the wind. Then, from the back of the barn, a quiet voice said, 5 cents. Heads turned. Laughter rippled through the rows of men. Eli Mercer stood there, hat low over weathered eyes, hands buried deep in the pockets of a frayed brown coat. His face was lean, wind-burned, and tired in the way only people who've worked too long in silence can be. 5 cents? Someone echoed, half choking on a laugh. You can't even buy a nail with that, Mercer. Eli didn't answer. He walked forward, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. He placed a single copper coin on the table in front of the auctioneer. It rang once, a small, lonely sound that seemed to stop the wind itself. Sold, the auctioneer muttered, half out of disbelief. As the gavel struck, a few men shook their heads. One spat into the dirt. He's lost his damn mind, another whispered. But Eli just nodded, took the rope, and looked into the horse's face. The animal didn't flinch. Its ears twitched once, as though recognizing something in the quiet man before it, something too broken to fear. Outside, the sun had already begun to drop behind the mesa, painting the sand in shades of copper and shadow. Eli led the horse through the gate, the sound of their steps soft against the slush of old snow, the road. Home was long, the kind that stretched between nowhere and almost nowhere. A truck rattled past, its driver slowing long enough to call out, "You saving that ghost, Mercer?" Eli adjusted his grip on the rope. "Maybe it'll save me first," he replied, and the man laughed until the sound vanished into the dust. The wind blew colder as they walked, biting through the seams of Eli's coat. The horse stumbled once, then found rhythm beside him, its breath rising in weak clouds. Above them, the last of daylight faded to iron gray. By the time they reached the gate to Mercer Farm, night had fallen completely. The place wasn't much anymore. 2 acres of parched soil, a sagging barn, and a small farmhouse with one window still patched by duct tape. Eli's daughter June stood on the porch, her scarf pulled high over her face. She was 17, slender as a reed, her dark hair tucked under a knitted cap. "Pa," she said, her voice muffled by the wind, "you didn't." He led the horse closer, looping the rope around a post. "Did." She stared at the animal. The scars, the ribs, the hollow look of something long resigned to dying. "5 cents, she said softly, disbelief mixing with worry. "You spent the last of it?" Eli hung his hat on a nail by the door. "Could have been worse. Could have spent it on myself." June crossed her arms, shivering. "That thing won't last a week." Eli looked toward the barn, its roof sagging under years of neglect. "Maybe. But I figured nobody should end their story in a room full of laughter." For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, listening to the wind scratch across the tin siding. Then, almost shyly, the horse took a step forward, pressing its nose against Eli's shoulder. Its breath was warm, damp, and trembling. June's eyes softened despite herself. "What are you going to call it?" Eli thought for a moment, glancing at the lantern light trembling across the horse's gray hide. "Lumen," he said. "Means light." June frowned. "Doesn't look like much light left." "Then we'll make some." Inside the barn, the straw smelled of rain that never came. Eli unfastened the rope, guided the horse into the stall, and spread an old blanket over its back. The animal sighed, an exhausted, human sound. In the quiet, Eli could hear the faint rattle of a wind chime he'd hung long ago on the rafters. It jingled once, sharp and metallic. Lumen's ears flicked back instantly, eyes wide. "Easy," Eli murmured, touching its neck. "It's just the wind." But the horse stayed tense, muscles shivering under his hand. Something about that sound, the chime, the metal, had struck a memory too deep for words. Eli stepped away, lowering the lantern. "All right then," he whispered. "No more noise tonight." He reached up, stopped the chime with one calloused hand, and the barn fell quiet again. So quiet he could hear the soft rhythm of the horse, breathing beside him. For the first time in a long while, Eli didn't feel entirely alone. He leaned on the stall door, staring at the dying glow of the lantern. "5 cents, he said under his breath, almost to himself. "Let's see what that buys us." Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying with it the faint scent of coming rain, the kind that always teased this land but rarely arrived. Lumen turned its head toward the sound, ears twitching, eyes glinting faintly in the dark. June called from the porch. "You coming in, Pa?" "In a minute." He stayed there until the light faded completely, until the only things left were the steady breathing of the horse and the distant hum of the desert. And when Eli finally turned to go, the horse followed one step behind him, quiet, hesitant, but willing. Morning light crawled through the cracks of Eli Mercer's barn, painting stripes across the dusty floorboards. The chill of the desert night lingered, turning every breath into a faint cloud. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and bare, nothing but brittle weeds and the endless hum of wind turbines that no longer turned. The world around the Mercer farm had stopped moving long before Eli ever brought that horse home. Lumen stood quietly in the stall, its ribs rising and falling in slow, uneven rhythm. The gray gelding looked more like a shadow than an animal. Its eyes followed Eli as he poured a bucket of water into an old trough, the sound echoing softly through the empty barn. The smell of hay, oil, and cold metal hung in the air, a reminder of work half finished and dreams that had run dry. June appeared at the door, her jacket zipped to her chin. She held 2 mugs of coffee, one chipped and one cracked. "You didn't sleep again," she said, her tone soft but carrying the weight of long familiarity. She handed him the mug, steam curling between them like a truce. "Didn't feel right," Eli answered, eyes still on the horse. "He kept moving around like he's dreaming something bad." June sipped her drink. "You always pick the broken ones," she murmured. "Stray dogs, busted tractors, now this." Eli smiled without humor. "Some things just need time." "Time doesn't heal hunger," she replied, setting her mug on the post. "You should call Dr. Aiko. Let her check him." He nodded slowly. After chores. By midday, the sky turned white with dust, the kind that coated your teeth and made even breathing feel like work. Eli fixed a section of the old fence while June filmed short clips for her small rural life vlog, a project that had never found much audience but helped her pay for school books through Google AdSense ads. Her camera followed her father from a distance, the way his hands moved steady and sure, the way silence seemed to fold itself around him like an old coat. When the vet's truck finally arrived, it brought a soft hum of hope. Dr. Aiko Tanaka, small-framed, with hair tied in a neat braid, stepped out carrying her black bag. "You always find the hopeless cases, Mr. Mercer," she said with a faint smile. "That's your trademark." Eli chuckled. "Guess I'm building a brand, huh? Maybe I should start a blog, Budget Horse Rescue, keywords and all." Aiko smirked. "You'd rank high for cheap mercy." Her hands were gentle but quick, tracing the horse's neck and legs. "He's dehydrated, underfed, but nothing broken. The scars, rope burns, maybe from restraint training. He's seen fire, too." She pointed to the faint singe marks near the mane. Could be from a barn fire or neglect. Hard to tell. Lumen shivered under her touch, his breath short. When she reached toward his ears, the horse jerked violently, hitting the stall wall with a sharp thud. Dust fell like rain. Eli caught the halter, murmuring low, "Easy, boy. Ain't nobody here gonna hurt you." The sound of his voice calmed the horse more than the vet's skill could. Aiko watched in quiet surprise. "He listens to you," she said. "That's rare, this early." Eli stroked the gray neck, his hand rough as bark. "He knows what silence means." They stood together as the light dimmed to gold. Outside, the wind carried the smell of dry sage and faraway rain. For a moment, Aiko looked at Eli the way people look at an old photograph. Half nostalgia, half wonder for something already fading. When she left, June walked up beside her father, camera still in hand. "She's right, you know. He trusts you." Eli leaned on the stall door. "Trust's a funny thing. You can't buy it, can't steal it. Sometimes it just shows up when you're not looking." June pointed the camera toward Lumen. "Maybe this one could help the channel. 5-cent horse finds his second chance. Might actually get some clicks." Eli shrugged, smiling faintly. "Just don't make him famous before he's ready." That night, the house creaked under the cold. Eli sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old ledger filled with unpaid bills. The numbers blurred after a while, all the same shade of hopeless. From the barn came a soft sound, hooves shifting, the occasional low whinny like a dream stirring. He put the book down and stepped outside. Moonlight washed the fields silver. The world looked softer that way, less cruel. Lumen stood in the stall, staring toward the east again, the same direction he'd faced since coming home. His ears flicked, listening to something only he could hear. Maybe wind across another pasture. Maybe memory. Eli leaned against the gate. "What are you seeing, boy? Where's your mind run off to?" The horse didn't move, didn't blink, just breathed. The rhythm of it filled the quiet, until it felt like prayer. For the first time, Eli realized he was breathing with him. Two tired creatures, bound by a silence that neither fully understood. Inside, the clock ticked past midnight. June's room was dark, her laptop still open to a paused video of their old life. Back when her mother laughed in sunlight, when the farm was green, when hope had the sound of water running through the acequia. Eli watched the horse a while longer, then whispered into the dark, "You and me, Lumen. Dust and bones. Let's see if we can grow something out of that." The wind rose, carrying the scent of rain again, but it never came. The next morning rose slow and gray, the kind of light that doesn't promise much, just enough to show you what's still standing. Eli woke before dawn, as always, when the desert still held a whisper of cold. He made coffee in the dented percolator, its hiss filling the small kitchen while June slept on the couch, one arm draped over a pile of notebooks. Outside, a pale mist drifted low over the field, turning the world into the color of dust and milk. He walked to the barn, mug in hand. Lumen stood where he always did, still, his breath curling in thin ribbons. Eli set the mug on a post, leaned against the stall, and spoke softly. "Morning, boy." The horse flicked his ears but didn't move. Eli tossed a few flakes of hay into the trough, then pulled up an overturned bucket and sat, rubbing his hands together. The barn smelled of warm straw and metal. Somewhere, a bird made the first call of day, uncertain and hopeful. A sound behind him made Eli turn. June stood in the doorway, hair loose, wearing his old work jacket that swallowed her small frame. She held a handful of carrots. "He hasn't eaten much," she said. "Maybe he doesn't like hay." "He'll eat when he's ready." June hesitated, then stepped closer. "You ever think maybe he doesn't know he's safe yet?" Eli looked at her, surprised by how much she suddenly sounded like her mother. "Maybe," he said. "Takes time to unlearn fear." She opened the gate and moved slow, the way Eli had taught her long ago when they still had cattle. Lumen shifted, nostrils flaring. His head came up high, muscles tight. June stopped a few feet away. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just me." For a long breath, nothing happened. Then, as if the air between them broke, Lumen took one careful step forward. The barn seemed to hold its breath. June extended her hand, palm open. The horse lowered his head, hesitated, then brushed his muzzle against her skin. It wasn't much, just a touch. But it was enough. Eli exhaled the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. June smiled faintly, her eyes damp. "Hi," she said to the horse, voice trembling. "You can stay as long as you want." The moment hung there, quiet, delicate, as sunlight finally pushed through the small window above the stall, spreading over the two of them like a benediction. Later that afternoon, the air turned sharp again, the wind whistling through the cottonwoods. June filmed a short video for her channel, framing the scene carefully. The old barn, her father, mending fence wire, the horse in soft focus behind her. She spoke to the camera with a shy smile. "Sometimes," she said, "kindness looks like foolishness at first." She didn't add the title, But it would be 5 cents of mercy, a phrase she knew would catch people's attention on YouTube search results and Google ads for rural life. When she turned off the camera, she found Eli watching from the fence. "You think people will care?" she asked. "Maybe not right away," he said. "But someone will. The right ones always do." That evening, clouds gathered heavy and low, swallowing the horizon. Eli repaired the hinge on the barn door while June brushed Lumen's coat. The horse twitched under her touch, but didn't pull away. "He's softer than he looks," she said. "Most things are," Eli murmured, tightening the bolt. A flash of lightning blinked far to the south, followed by a low rumble that rolled across the plains. Lumen raised his head sharply, ears pricked. The smell of ozone drifted in. When the first drop of rain hit the roof, he flinched. The second came harder, like stones on tin. Thunder cracked close now, sharp enough to rattle the walls. The horse's breath quickened. "Easy," June said, reaching for him. But the next flash of light made him rear back, slamming the stall gate. Eli grabbed the rope, voice low but firm. "Whoa, boy. It's just the storm. Ain't gonna hurt you." Lumen's eyes rolled white for a moment, then slowly settled on Eli's voice. Rain hammered the roof in wild rhythm. Eli stepped closer, resting a hand against the horse's neck. "Breathe with me," he said softly. And somehow, the horse did. The tremor ran out of him like water draining from a cracked bucket. When the storm finally passed, the desert smelled of wet sage and electricity. June leaned against the post, exhausted but smiling. "He trusts you more than me," she said. Eli shook his head. "He trusts calm, that's all." They stayed like that a while, listening to the slow drip of rain from the eaves. Then, from far away, a sound, a metallic clang, faint but clear, rose through the night. The old wind chime near the shed. Lumen froze, ears flicking toward it. His body stiffened, breath sharp again. June turned. "What is it?" Eli watched the horse's eyes darken, something ancient flickering there. Fear, memory, pain. "Whatever happened to him," Eli said quietly. "It's got metal in it." The horse backed once, then stopped, trembling. Eli reached out a steady hand. "Not tonight, boy. No ghosts tonight." He pulled the chime down and laid it gently on the dirt. June's voice was barely a whisper. "He's remembering something, isn't he?" "Yeah," Eli said. "We all do, when it rains." The rest of the night settled into silence. From the porch, the world glimmered under a thin sheen of moonlight, each puddle catching the reflection of the sky. Lumen stood still in his stall, eyes open, staring east again. June watched him through the barn door. "Where do you think he came from?" Eli's answer came after a long pause. "Somewhere that didn't deserve him." She nodded, understanding without words. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching across the walls, horse, girl, man, all stitched together by something unseen but growing. When they turned in for the night, Eli looked back one last time. Lumen had lowered his head, calm now. In the dim light, Eli could swear he saw a faint gleam in the horse's coat, like silver dust under the skin. He closed the barn door softly, whispering, "You're safe here." Outside, the land exhaled the last of the storm. The desert, washed clean for a moment, smelled of possibility. The sun returned fierce and unfiltered the next morning, burning away the last trace of rain. The land smelled of iron and dust, the color of rusted dreams. Eli leaned on the barn rail, sipping coffee gone lukewarm, watching the steam lift off Lumen's damp coat. The horse stood quietly, half in shadow, the faint tremor from last night's storm still flickering in his muscles. June sat on an overturned bucket, sketching in a notebook. "He's beautiful when he's not scared," she said, her pencil scratching across the page. "Almost like he's remembering who he used to be." Eli smiled faintly. "Most of us look better in memory." They were still talking when a truck rattled up the dirt road. The tires kicked up a small cloud that settled slow as regret. Mateo Ruiz, the farrier, stepped out, tall, dark skin sunburned to bronze, a limp in his left leg that came from a rodeo fall years ago. He carried his tools in a leather case, worn soft from use. "You still got that 5-cent miracle?" he called out. Eli chuckled. "Depends who you ask. My daughter thinks I bought a ghost." Mateo spat a sunflower seed shell into the dirt. "Well, let's see what kind of ghost shoes he's wearing." Inside the barn, the light came through in narrow shafts, catching every speck of dust. Mateo crouched by Lumen's front hoof, running a practiced hand along the leg. "He's not used to this," he muttered as the horse shifted away. "Easy, big man. We're just looking." Eli held the halter steady. "He doesn't like metal sounds. Makes him nervous." "Yeah?" Mateo tapped the rasp lightly against the wall. Lumen flinched, but didn't bolt. "There it is again," the farrier said quietly. "Trauma like that don't come from nowhere." When he lifted the rear hoof, something caught the light. A small metallic glint. Thin, curved, deliberate. He scraped away dirt and grit, then whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." "What?" Eli leaned closer. Mateo turned the hoof toward him. Embedded in the outer wall, under layers of growth, was a faint mark burned into the keratin. 2 tiny wings carved around the number 17. The lines were clean, too perfect to be accident. June stepped closer, phone in hand. "That's not a brand. It's like a symbol." Mateo nodded. "Some breeders mark foals this way. Personal signatures, not registered brands. But this? It's old school, something out of Kentucky or Tennessee. I haven't seen one in years." Aiko arrived just as Mateo finished cleaning the last hoof. She crouched beside them, eyes narrowing at the mark. "Whoever did that had precision," she said. "Probably not a ranch brand, more like therapy or training stock. See how clean it is? That horse came from money once." Eli frowned. "Then how'd he end up here?" The vet stood, brushing off her jeans. "Same way people do. Wrong hands, wrong timing." They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds were rasp on hoof, the sigh of wind, and the slow rhythm of breathing. 3 humans orbiting one animal whose past refused to stay buried. When they were done, Mateo wiped sweat from his brow and packed his tools. "That mark's worth looking into," he said. "Might tell you who he used to belong to." June turned to her father. "We could search it online. Maybe find a registry or something." Eli shrugged. "Maybe later. Don't matter much who he was. What matters is who he is now." But that night, long after the others had gone, Eli couldn't stop thinking about it. He sat by the stove, the heat making his eyes sting, staring at a piece of paper where June had copied the symbol. 2 wings, the number 17. It looked like something sacred and broken all at once. He carried the lantern back to the barn. Lumen stirred when he entered, ears twitching. The mark caught the light again, a thin gleam under the dull gray coat. Eli crouched beside him, fingers tracing near the edges of the carving. "Someone marked you to claim you," he whispered. "Guess they forgot to keep you." The horse shifted, breathing hard, as if the memory itself was a wound reopening. He stomped once, twice, the echo ringing against the boards. Eli stepped back, hands raised. "It's all right, boy. Not their hands anymore." The air felt charged, humming faintly. Lumen's eyes locked on him, amber catching flame. Then the horse let out a deep sound, half whinny, half sigh, and lowered his head until his muzzle brushed Eli's sleeve. The man froze. It was the same gesture June had felt days earlier. The same unspoken question. Trust? Eli reached up slowly, resting his hand against the warm hide. "Yeah," he murmured. "We'll figure it out." The wind outside picked up, dragging sand across the window. Somewhere far away, thunder murmured over the plains. Eli looked toward the east, the direction Lumen always faced, and saw nothing but the dark horizon. Still, something about it pulled at him, like a voice beneath the soil whispering through the years. He returned to the house after midnight. June was asleep, laptop open beside her. On the screen, a search page glowed, faintly. In the bar were the words she'd typed before dozing off. "Wing Symbol Horse Brand, 17 Kentucky Therapy Ranch." He smiled softly and closed the lid. Before turning out the light, he whispered to the room, "Guess we're all trying to remember where we came from." In the barn, Lumen stamped once, the sound muffled by hay. His breath rose steady and calm. The carved mark gleamed faintly under the moonlight, as if it carried its own small fire, one that refused to go out. The wind came back dry the next day, scraping across the land like sandpaper. The sky was a hard, cloudless blue, the kind that made everything look farther away than it really was. Eli worked along the old irrigation ditch, the acequia, as his grandfather used to call it, clearing tumbleweed and debris from the shallow bed. It hadn't carried water in years, just dust, and the ghosts of what used to grow there. June walked beside him, dragging a rake that clattered against stones. "I don't get why you keep this thing," she said. "There's no water left to move." "Same reason I keep breathing," Eli said without looking up. "You never know when it'll rain again." She rolled her eyes, but her voice softened. "That's the most depressing hope I've ever heard." Eli smiled faintly. "Hope usually sounds that way until it works." The sound of a nicker drew their attention. Lumen stood at the edge of the ditch, ears pricked, staring at the far end of the property. His hooves shuffled restlessly, nostrils flaring. "What's he looking at?" June asked. Eli straightened, shading his eyes. The gelding stepped down into the ditch bed, then began pawing at a mound of dirt and roots. The motion was purposeful, not random. Dust rose in a slow swirl, catching the sun like smoke. "Hey," Eli called, climbing down. "What are you doing, boy?" Lumen didn't stop until the tip of something metallic flashed beneath the soil. Eli knelt, brushing away the dirt. Buried there was a small tin can, rusted shut, wedged under the roots of an old cottonwood. June crouched beside him. "Treasure?" "Doubt it," Eli said, prying it open with his pocket knife. Inside lay 3 things: a folded piece of paper brittle with age, a short length of tarnished copper wire shaped like a small loop, and a faded Polaroid photograph. He unfolded the paper first. The ink was smeared, the edges water-damaged, but the drawing was clear enough. A rough, hand-sketched map. A line representing a stream, an X marked near what looked like their property, and a small note scrawled in block letters. Laurel 17, follow the water. June held the Polaroid up to the light. It showed a wide green pasture fenced with white rails, sunlight glinting off the mane of a young gray horse standing beside a woman in a straw hat. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Lumen." Eli took the photo, staring at it long. The horse was smaller, cleaner, its coat silver white, eyes bright with life. "And that's not New Mexico," he said quietly. "That's grass, real grass." June turned the photo over. On the back, written in fading ink, were the words, "Blue Laurel Acres, Berea, Kentucky." "That's a long way from here," she said. "Too far for a horse to walk," Eli murmured. When they showed the items to Aiko later that evening, she handled each with the care of a museum curator. "Blue Laurel," she said thoughtfully. "I think I've heard of that place. It was a therapy ranch. Closed after a flood 5 or 6 years ago." June frowned. "Therapy ranch?" "For veterans," Aiko explained. "They used horses for rehabilitation. The numbers, 17, 18, 19, those marked each therapy mount. Laurel 17 would have been one of them." Eli looked at the map again. The ink line seemed to tremble in the lantern light. "So he wasn't just any horse." "No," Aiko said. "He was part of someone's healing." They fell silent. The thought hung heavy in the room. A horse once used to mend human pain, now broken himself, standing in a barn on a dying farm in New Mexico. The irony tasted bitter. June's mind spun. "If we find out who owned Blue Laurel, maybe they'll know what happened. Maybe it explains the mark." Eli hesitated. "Sometimes answers don't fix things, June." She met his eyes. "Maybe not. But silence doesn't either." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The desert wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, the sound like the voice of something trying to remember its own story. He got up, lit the lantern, and studied the map again. The drawing showed their ditch connected to a wider channel running east. At the bottom of the page was a symbol, a small wing sketched beside a number, the same wings carved under Lumen's hoof. He stared at it until dawn. When the first light came, he saddled up the horse. Lumen moved uncertainly, but willing. June watched from the porch. "Where you going?" "Just following the water," he said. He rode along the dried acequia until it vanished into scrubland, then through fields cracked and littered with tumbleweed. Every so often, Lumen stopped, sniffing the ground, as if scenting something older than both of them. At the edge of the arroyo, Eli saw what remained of a pipeline, metal, twisted, corroded. The rusted sign nearby read, "County Irrigation Project. Pike Construction. Nolan Pike." Eli's jaw tightened. The man had been promising for years to bring water back, yet every acre north of town stayed bone dry while his own ranch thrived green. "You've been stealing what ain't yours," Eli muttered under his breath. Lumen pawed the ground again, nostrils wide, eyes fixed east. Eli followed his gaze toward the horizon, where heat shimmered like water. Maybe that's where it led. the truth of how one horse from Kentucky ended up lost in the desert. By the time they returned home, the sun was sinking, painting the world in molten orange. June met them halfway, dust streaking her face. "You look like you've seen ghosts," she said. "Maybe I have," Eli answered. He handed her the photo. "Kentucky," he said simply. She turned it over in her hands, reading the faded letters again. "You think he wants to go back?" Eli looked at the horse, who stood motionless in the glow of sunset, head lifted toward the east wind. "I think he's already on his way." That night, a soft sound woke June, a rhythmic scrape outside. She peered through the window and saw Lumen pacing the fence line, stopping every few feet to sniff the air. When he reached the gate, he stopped and stared into the dark horizon. June whispered into the quiet room. "He remembers." And for the first time since he'd bought that dying horse for 5 cents, she wondered if they were the ones being led. Not him. The morning they left, the horizon glowed faintly pink, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Eli packed light, an old canvas bag, a few tools, some feed, and the rusted tin can that once held the map. June loaded her camera and notebooks into the truck, while Lumen waited by the fence, his gray coat shimmering under the first wash of daylight. "You sure about this?" June asked, voice still groggy from the early hour. Eli adjusted the worn saddle on Lumen's back. "You can't fix what you don't face." Aiko came to see them off, her dark braid whipped by wind. "You're chasing ghosts," she said, half teasing, half serious. Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe, but ghosts built this town, didn't they?" Aiko slipped a folded slip of paper into June's jacket. "Coordinates for Blue Laurel Acres," she said. "If it's still there, you'll need this." The truck engine coughed awake. Lumen snorted, pawing the dirt. The sound was steady, ready. They headed east. The road stretched long through the Texas Panhandle, a ribbon of asphalt shimmering in the heat. Flat fields rolled away on both sides, acres of brittle grass, oil rigs motionless in the distance. June filmed through the windshield, narrating softly for her vlog. "We're following the map," she said. "My father thinks this horse remembers something. I think maybe he's remembering himself." Eli didn't interrupt. He liked hearing her voice again. Alive, steady, confident. By mid-afternoon, the truck hummed across the state line into Oklahoma, then wound through rolling hills green with late spring. Lumen followed in the small horse trailer behind them, quiet except for the occasional thump when the road grew rough. Eli checked the mirror every few miles, watching the shape move inside. Gray, calm, like smoke trying to become solid again. That evening, they stopped at a small roadside stable near Fort Smith. The woman who ran it, Mrs. Calloway, had hair like silver wire and hands cracked from soap and hay. When she saw Lumen, she frowned. "He's been somewhere that burned," she said softly. "You can see it in the eyes." Eli nodded. "We're trying to find out where." "Well," she said, feeding the horse a carrot, "some fires never really go out." June smiled politely, but Eli caught the deeper meaning. That night he dreamed of flames again, his wife coughing in the smoke, the fire that took half their barn, the helplessness of watching something living turn to ash. He woke before dawn, sweat cold on his skin, and went to check on Lumen. The horse was standing still, ears pricked eastward, as if listening for something far beyond the hills. 2 more days carried them through Tennessee, the landscape softening into forests and rivers. June filled her camera card with images, creeks reflecting sky, barns painted red against rolling green, roadside crosses weathered by time. They stopped once at a diner near the Mississippi border, where a radio on the counter played old country songs about second chances. Eli listened, his thumb tracing the coffee cup rim. "Funny," he said quietly, "how every song's about somebody trying to go home." June looked up from her notes. "You think we'll find it? Home, I mean?" Eli met her eyes, tired but kind. "Maybe not ours, but his, maybe." When they crossed into Kentucky, the air changed. It smelled of rain and clover, of something alive. The fences here weren't wire, but painted wood, running for miles like white stitches through the hills. Horses grazed in wide open pastures, their coats shining under the soft drizzle. Lumen raised his head, nostrils flaring, ears forward. Eli felt the pull through the reins, a memory waking. They reached Berea by dusk. The town was small, built on old brick and quiet pride. Ruthie Caldwell's address, scrawled on Aiko's note, led them down a narrow lane lined with sugar maples to a farmhouse surrounded by knee-high grass. The sign on the gate read, "Blue Laurel Acres." The paint was peeling, the letters faded, but the name still held dignity. Ruthie met them on the porch, a woman in her 70s with eyes the color of worn denim. "You drove a long way," she said, her accent soft as the hills. "And that horse," she paused, her breath catching. "I'd know him anywhere." Eli removed his hat. "You remember him?" Ruthie stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for Lumen's muzzle. "Laurel 17, she whispered. "We called him Ash then. He was our best therapy mount. Smart, gentle, stubborn as truth." June's eyes widened. "Ash?" Ruthie nodded. "He saved 3 soldiers from quitting on themselves. Then the flood came. We lost everything. The barns, the files, even the river road. I thought he was gone with it." Eli glanced toward the pasture behind her house. The land still bore scars, fences warped, soil eroded, old water lines marking the barn walls. "How'd he end up in New Mexico?" Ruthie shook her head. "Trucks came from the insurance buyers, rounding up what survived. Half the horses went to shelters. Others were sold off cheap. He must have slipped through somewhere." As the evening cooled, she invited them inside. The house smelled of cedar and old paper. On the wall hung framed photos, veterans with horses, smiles shy but real. Ruthie traced one picture with her fingertip. "That's the last one of Ash before the flood. He never liked thunder after that." Outside, Lumen stirred, lifting his head toward the darkening clouds. Thunder rolled far away. Eli said quietly, "He still doesn't." They sat together long after sunset, trading stories. Ruthie spoke of the soldiers who found peace in the rhythm of brushing a horse, of how healing doesn't always look like healing. It looks like patience, forgiveness, time. June listened, her camera forgotten on the table. When Eli rose to leave, Ruthie stopped him. "You came all this way," she said. "Don't just take him home. Listen to what he's trying to tell you. He remembers more than pain." Eli nodded, the words heavy in his chest. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and even. He looked toward the pasture where Lumen stood under the downpour, motionless, eyes closed, as if finally back in the place where the world had once made sense. June whispered, "He found it." Eli shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "He remembered it." The drive back west was quieter than the trip out. Kentucky faded behind them in slow layers, green to brown, fields to dust. By the time the truck crossed into Oklahoma, the horizon had stretched flat again, the air dry enough to crack your lips. Lumen rode steady in the trailer, silent except for the soft, rhythmic shift of hooves against wood. June edited video on her laptop in the passenger seat, earbuds in, her face lit blue by the screen. Eli kept his eyes on the road. He didn't need music. The hum of tires was enough. His thoughts drifted to Ruthie's voice, the way she'd said, "He remembers more than pain." Maybe that was true for both of them. When they reached the edge of Clovis, clouds were already gathering low over the plains. The color of the sky told Eli everything he needed to know. A storm was coming, the kind that could peel the roof off a barn if you didn't listen early enough. By the time they rolled into the farmyard, the wind had teeth. June climbed out of the truck, shielding her face. "Feels like the sky's angry." "It always is," Eli said, unfastening the trailer gate. Lumen backed down carefully, head high, nostrils twitching. He sniffed the air, the way animals do before something breaks loose. Inside the house, the air felt heavier than the weather outside. Bills lay stacked on the table, a reminder that not every storm came with thunder. Eli dropped his hat beside them. "We'll fix the fence tomorrow," he said. "Rain'll loosen the posts again." June hesitated. "Dad, what if we don't stay?" He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Blue Laurel's rebuilding. Ruthie said they're reopening with new funding. They could use someone like you, someone who knows how to train a horse that's been through fire." Eli stared at her, a mix of pride and ache. "And you? You'd leave this place behind that easy?" She shrugged, eyes darting to the window where lightning flashed across the mesa. "It's not easy, Dad. It's just maybe time." The first drops hit the roof like small stones. Lumen shifted in the barn, kicking the stall once, twice. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Eli walked out to calm him, the rain starting to fall in sheets. Inside the barn, the horse's eyes were wide again, memories of Kentucky floods and thunder rolling over mountains. "Hey," Eli said softly, touching the gelding's neck. "You've outrun worse." But the thunder came closer, splitting the sky open. Lumen reared, rope snapping taut in Eli's hands. Lightning flared white through the slats, and for a second, Eli saw the reflection of his own fear in the horse's eyes. The same helplessness that had frozen him years ago as fire took what he loved. He didn't shout this time. He simply stood still, breathing slow. "You're all right," he whispered, his voice a steady anchor. "You're here. We're both still here." Slowly, the horse calmed. His breathing synced with Eli's until the rhythm steadied. Outside, the wind howled, dragging grit across the yard. By dawn, the storm had passed. The ground steamed under the early sun, wet soil shining like spilled oil. Eli walked the fence line, boots sinking deep. At the far corner, a section had collapsed entirely. The irrigation ditch overflowed from the brief flood, its banks slick and glimmering. He knelt beside the broken post and froze. Buried halfway in the mud was a piece of metal pipe stamped with the letters Pike Construction. The same name printed on the irrigation sign miles down the arroyo. The man who'd been promising water, while his crews rerouted it for his own land. Eli's pulse quickened. He pulled the pipe free, turning it in his hands. The mark was fresh. not from years ago. Someone had been working this ditch recently. Back at the house, June was on a video call with Aiko, showing her the footage she'd captured from Kentucky. When Eli dropped the pipe onto the table, both of them jumped. "Dad, what?" "Pike's been here," Eli said flatly. "He's draining water again, probably from the same channel Ruthie's place used before it flooded." Aiko frowned. That would mean that what happened there might happen here. The room went quiet, except for the ticking of the old clock. Outside, Lumen pawed the ground, restless. June finally spoke. "So what do we do?" Eli looked out the window toward the barn. "We get ready." The next few days passed with a strange stillness. The sky stayed bruised, the wind always shifting. At night, Eli could hear the faint hum of engines somewhere beyond the ridge, the sound of machinery digging where no one was supposed to. He walked the property line with a flashlight, each step crunching over soaked ground. On the third night, he saw them. 2 trucks parked by the old ditch, lights off. Figures moved with shovels and hoses, water gleaming under the moon. He recognized Pike's shape instantly. The way he stood, hands on hips, confident and cruel. Eli stayed in the dark, watching. When a loose rock rolled under his boot, one of the men turned, scanning the ridge. Eli crouched lower, heart hammering. The horse in the barn gave a low, anxious call, as if feeling his tension from afar. When the trucks finally left, Eli returned home, soaked in sweat and rain. June was waiting on the porch, worry etched in her face. "What did you see?" she whispered. "Enough," he said. "They're pumping the acequia dry before it reaches the town wells." June's eyes filled. "That's illegal. Illegal only matters if someone listens." For a long time, neither spoke. Lightning flickered again far to the west, but this time there was no thunder, just a heavy quiet. Inside the barn, Lumen shifted, head turning toward the east once more. His ears twitched, body tense. Eli watched him and felt the weight of something rising, the sense that the horse understood danger long before men did. "Storm's not done with us," Eli said finally. June nodded, gripping his sleeve. "Then we don't run from it this time." The first fat drops began to fall again, dotting the dust, each one hissing like a promise. Eli looked up at the bruised sky and exhaled. "Let it come," he whispered. The wind rose before sunrise, long before the first flash of lightning cut across the ridge. The sky hung low and swollen, ready to split. Eli knew that sound, the way the wind bent through the mesquite trees, the way the ground trembled under it. Storms in New Mexico didn't come often, but when they did, they came to erase things. By noon, the first fat drops hit the dirt, turning to mud within minutes. June stood on the porch, filming the dark shelf of clouds rolling across the plain. "It's beautiful," she said, voice shaking a little. Eli came up behind her, pulling his coat tight. "Beautiful's what folks say before something bad happens." Lumen called from the barn, a restless sound, deep and uneasy. Eli moved to check on him, but before he reached the door, lightning struck somewhere close enough to rattle the hinges. The rain came hard then, in sheets, pounding the roof until it hummed like a drum. By late afternoon, the arroyo that cut across the back of their land had turned to a river. Brown water foamed and twisted through the ditch that had been dry for years. "It's overflowing," June shouted over the roar. "The acequia's breaking." Eli grabbed his boots and ran, for the ridge. The air smelled of wet iron, sharp and electric. Down in the hollow, the fence posts wavered in the current like reeds, and trapped behind the lowest section of wire, half a dozen horses, thin and wild-eyed. Strays, maybe from Pike's holding pens upriver, maybe abandoned when the water came. They fought to stay standing as the flood deepened, hooves sliding in the mud. "Dad!" June's voice cracked. "They'll drown!" Eli turned. "Get the ropes!" Lumen burst from the barn before Eli could stop him, muscles slick with rain, eyes fixed on the struggling animals. He plunged into the water without hesitation. Eli's heart seized. "Lumen, no!" The horse forged ahead, the current clawing at his chest. Eli followed, stumbling, fighting for footing. June came behind with a coil of rope over her shoulder, rain blurring her vision. One of the trapped horses screamed, tangled in wire. Lumen reached it first, pressed his body against the panicked animal, steadying it with his weight. Eli waded in, knife in hand, cutting through the fence strand by strand. The water was ice cold, rising fast. His fingers numbed, the handle slick in his grip. "Hold on, boy," he shouted, not sure if he meant Lumen or himself. The wire snapped. The trapped horse lunged free, splashing away toward higher ground. Eli gasped as the current nearly pulled him under. Lumen swung around, blocking the surge with his body, bracing against the flow. June threw the rope, her aim sharp. Eli caught it and looped it around the nearest fence post. Together, they pulled, guiding another horse toward safety. The roar of water drowned everything, their voices, their fear. Then Eli's boot slipped. He went down hard, swallowed by cold and mud. For one terrifying instant, he saw nothing but brown water closing over his head. He surfaced, choking, clutching at air. "Eli!" June screamed. Lumen wheeled around, eyes blazing. He waded against the current, teeth gripping Eli's jacket collar. The horse heaved once, twice, dragging him toward the bank. Eli coughed, chest burning, clutching the rope that June threw again. Together, man and daughter crawled up the slope, soaked and shivering. When Eli looked back, Lumen was still in the flood, chest deep, standing guard, as the last of the trapped horses climbed to dry land. His coat was streaked with mud, his breath visible in the cold rain. Then he turned and walked out of the water, slow and steady, like something carved from the storm itself. June dropped to her knees, tears mixing with the rain. "He saved you," she said. Eli touched the horse's neck, voice hoarse. "He saved all of us." The storm didn't stop until near midnight. When it finally passed, the sky cracked open with stars, sharp and clean. The fields shimmered under pools of standing water. The air was cold enough to make their teeth ache, but the silence that followed was the sweetest Eli had ever known. They spent what was left of the night tending to the rescued horses. One had a gash on its flank, another limped, but all were alive. Lumen stood near the barn entrance, too tired to eat, eyes half closed. June wrapped a blanket around his shoulders as if he were human. "You're not just light anymore," she whispered. "You're fire." Eli didn't sleep. He sat beside Lumen until dawn, listening to the faint drip of rain from the roof. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, it caught the horse's coat in gold. The carved wings under his hoof gleamed wet and new again, the mud washed clean. June came out carrying her camera, hands trembling from cold. "People need to see this," she said. "Not for views, for truth." Eli nodded slowly. "Then tell it right, not as a miracle, as what it was." "And what was it?" she asked. He looked out toward the flooded arroyo, now calm and glistening. "Mercy," he said. "Just mercy." Later, when the town came to survey the damage, word spread about the rescue at Arroyo Ridge. Aiko arrived with a truck full of medical supplies, Mateo with fencing tools. Even Beatrice Holt from the auction house showed up, shaking her head. 5 cents, she muttered. "Guess that was the best investment you ever made." Eli smiled without answering. Lumen lifted his head at the sound of her voice, but didn't move. The horse had given all he had to give. He deserved the stillness now. As evening fell, the ridge glowed amber again. The land looked washed, renewed. June sat in the doorway of the barn, editing footage. The storm, the rescue, her father and the horse locked in that desperate dance against the flood. The video would become her most watched clip, though she didn't know it yet. Inside, Eli whispered to Lumen, "You done good, boy." The gelding shifted, exhaled, and lowered his head until it rested gently against Eli's chest. The gesture was quiet, but it carried everything the storm had washed away. The fear, the distance, the doubt. Outside, the acequia gurgled softly, a sound neither had heard in years. For the first time, water flowed through their land again, carrying both memory and renewal. The storm had left a silence that felt almost holy. Morning light spilled across the valley, soft and golden, washing over the wet fields and broken fences. The air smelled of mud and sage, but beneath it lingered another scent. Burnt metal, faint and bitter. It was the smell of things that had survived too much. Eli stood at the edge of the arroyo, looking down where the water still crawled sluggishly through the ditch. The bodies of fallen branches and debris were tangled along the banks, but all the horses that Lumen had saved were grazing nearby, alive. It should have felt like victory, but all Eli could taste in the back of his throat was ash. June's camera clicked behind him. "People are already sharing the video," she said, her voice hushed, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. "Thousands of views overnight. They're calling him the 5-cent hero." Eli's mouth curved into a small, dry smile. That's not what he wanted. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But maybe people need something good right now." He didn't argue. He looked toward the horizon instead, where the line between sky and land shimmered like heat. Beyond that ridge, Nolan Pike's property lay. Too green, too perfect. The memory of that pipe stamped with Pike construction still sat heavy in Eli's mind. When Aiko arrived later that morning, she carried her vet bag and a worried look. "You both should rest," she told Eli. "You could have drowned last night." "Would have been easier," he said, only half joking. She studied him for a long moment, then began checking Lumen's legs. The gelding stood patient under her touch, a few fresh cuts along his knees, but nothing deep. "He's stronger than he looks," she said. "So was the woman I married," Eli replied quietly. Aiko's hands paused, but she didn't speak. There was nothing to fix in that kind of wound. By afternoon, the county trucks arrived, 2 white pickups with the town seal on the doors. Men in reflective vests waded through the mud, taking pictures, jotting notes. One of them approached Eli. "Heard you were out here last night. You realize you risked your life crossing that current?" Eli wiped his hands on his jeans. "I realize those horses don't belong to the floodplain." The man frowned. "Mr. Pike claims this land falls under his irrigation expansion." Eli's eyes hardened. Then Mr. Pike should come and say that himself. When the trucks left, the sky had turned hazy again. the kind of dull light that steals the edges off everything. June came to stand beside him, phone in hand. "You need to see this," she said. On the screen was a local news post. Illegal water diversion suspected in Clovis flood damage. Attached was a photo of the broken pipe Eli had found, the Pike Construction logo clear as a confession. "Who sent this?" he asked. "I did," June admitted. "And maybe a few thousand people who watched the video did too." Eli's first instinct was anger, at the risk, at the exposure, but it faded quickly. He saw the determination in her face, the same fire that used to live in his wife's eyes. "Guess we're not hiding anymore," he said. "No," she answered. "We're not." That night, the air cooled, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke from a neighbor's burn pile. Eli sat on the porch, watching the light fade. Lumen stood near the fence, head low, breathing slow. The rescued horses lingered close, shadows against the dim horizon. Mateo drove up just before dark, his truck tires crackling over gravel. "Town's talking," he said, as he joined Eli on the steps. "Pike's nervous. He's pulling strings, saying you faked the whole thing for publicity." Eli snorted. 5-cent fame doesn't buy much. "Maybe not," Mateo said, "but it can still scare a man like Pike. He's built on lies. Folks start looking too close. He'll fall apart." They sat in silence for a while, the kind only old friends can share. Then Mateo asked, "You ever think this horse showed up for a reason?" Eli looked toward the barn where Lumen shifted in the shadows. "Every day," he said. "And I still don't know if the reason's for him or for me." Later, after Mateo left, Eli wandered into the barn. The lantern light flickered weakly, dancing across the wooden beams. He brushed a hand over Lumen's shoulder. The horse leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. "Seems like every time I think I'm done with fightin'," Eli said softly, "someone reminds me I ain't." Lumen flicked an ear, exhaled, and pressed his forehead gently against Eli's chest. The gesture was so human it stopped him cold. He wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, feeling the slow heartbeat through his palms. When he stepped back, he noticed the wing-shaped mark under Lumen's hoof glinting again. Cleaner now, almost bright. It caught the light like polished metal. He thought of the name carved on that old map. Laurel 17. Follow the water. Maybe this was what it meant. Not chasing what was lost, but standing against what was wrong. By morning, word had spread further. Reporters from Albuquerque had called, asking for interviews. June turned them all down. "If this becomes about us," she told her father, "it'll stop being about the truth." He didn't argue. He'd spent too many years watching good things rot under attention. Still, the calls kept coming. And then, late that afternoon, a black truck rolled up the driveway. The logo on the door read Pike Construction. Nolan Pike stepped out in his pressed white shirt and polished boots, untouched by the mud that clung to everything else. He smiled the way men do when they're used to being feared. "Heard you had a rough night, Mercer," he said. "Lucky storm didn't wash your whole place away." Eli didn't invite him closer. Storm brought more truth than damage. Pike's smile faltered. "Truth's a dangerous thing to dig up. Best to let the county handle what's theirs." Eli crossed his arms. "Funny. Thought you were the county." They stood there, inches of air between pride and warning. Then Pike's gaze slid toward the barn, where Lumen watched from the shadows. "That horse looks expensive. Would be a shame if the state found out you never registered him." Eli's voice came out low, even. Would be a shame if the state found out you're stealing their water. For a moment, neither moved. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Then Pike turned back to his truck, smile thin and brittle. "Careful, Mercer. Mercy only buys you so much." He drove off without another word. Eli stood there long. After the sound of the engine faded, the taste of ash sharp in his mouth. June came to the doorway, eyes wide. "Was that—" "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "That was the storm that's still coming." She looked toward Lumen, who had stepped into the light, rain beginning to speckle his silver coat again. "Then we hold the line," she said. Eli nodded slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "We hold it." The rain began again, not angry this time, but steady, washing the dust from the air, the ash from his throat, and something older than fear from his heart. The week after Pike's visit, the sky stayed pale and uneasy, a color between silver and bone. The rain had passed, but the air still smelled of storm water and smoke. Eli patched fences, June uploaded her video, and Lumen grazed quietly near the acequia, as if the world had finally stopped spinning. Yet everyone could feel it. The waiting. Something was building again, not in the clouds this time, but in the hearts of the people. June's video spread faster than she could track. Within days, messages poured in. Ranchers offering hay, families asking how to help, strangers sending small donations through links she'd pinned under the clip. They weren't chasing fame. They were chasing redemption. The footage of Eli and Lumen standing against the flood had become more than a story. It had become a mirror. Aiko drove out one morning with Mateo, their truck loaded with supplies. She set a box of paperwork on the porch. "You've got enough donations to make this real," she said, smiling. "A fund for horses like him." Eli raised an eyebrow. "A fund?" "We call it the Mercy Fund," June said, excitement lighting her face. "It's not just for rescues. It's for anyone trying to rebuild. Animals, people, land. Mercy for all of it." Eli turned the words over like stones in his hand. Mercy. He'd spent half his life thinking it was weakness. Now it sounded like the only thing still worth holding. That evening, the barn filled with more people than it had in years. Neighbors came, hands calloused and hearts still wary. Alma Reyes, the long-haul driver who'd hauled hay for the auction, brought hot coffee and laughter. Beatrice Holt, once the woman who sold Lumen for 5 cents, arrived last, her face drawn but resolute. "I figured," she said, stepping inside, "if Mercy's on sale, I might finally afford some." The room broke into quiet laughter, the kind that carries warmth. June stood at the front, clutching a sheet of paper. "This isn't a speech," she said, "just a promise. My father bought a horse for 5 cents because no one else would. And that single choice," she looked toward Lumen, standing calm behind her, "changed everything. So we're starting this fund to make sure no living thing gets left behind again." Applause rose softly, hesitant but sincere. Eli watched from the corner, feeling something loosen in his chest. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was relief. The Mercy Fund grew faster than any of them expected. Local news ran a segment. Schools invited June to speak. Even national outlets picked up the headline, "5 Cents of Mercy Creates a Movement." The algorithm did what algorithms do, pushing the story into millions of screens. Words like hope, kindness, second chances trended for a week in a world too tired to believe in any of them. Still, not everyone was happy. Nolan Pike's company faced an inquiry from the county board. His lawyers issued denials. His publicist called Eli a liar. The threats came quietly, slashed tires, anonymous notes, but Eli didn't bend. He'd seen worse storms. One night, as he walked the property under a half moon, he found June sitting by the acequia, staring at the slow trickle of returning water. The surface shimmered with reflected starlight. "Mom used to sit here," she said. "Said this place was like a vein. When it dried, the whole heart did too." Eli knelt beside her. "Guess we finally got a pulse again." She smiled. "The fund got its first grant today. A ranch up north. They've got a blind mare they're trying to save. They named her Grace." "Good name," he said quietly. They sat together, listening to the frogs begin to sing again after years of silence. Across the field, Lumen lifted his head, ears turning toward the wind. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled again. Not close, just a reminder. Eli stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans. "Storm season's not done yet," he said. June frowned. "You think Pike's still coming after us?" "I think men like him don't stop until somebody makes them." The next morning, Sheriff Miles drove up in his dusty cruiser. His hat sat low, and his face looked older, more tired than Eli remembered. "County's pressing charges," he said. "They finally found proof Pike rerouted the water lines. You did good, Mercer." Eli crossed his arms. "Didn't do it for good. Just did what needed doing." Miles gave a half smile. "Same thing, some days." He looked toward Lumen grazing near the gate. "Heard about your mercy fund. Folks are talking. You got something bigger than this town now." Eli shook his head. "Don't need bigger. Just need steady." When the sheriff left, the day settled warm and still. The land smelled of growth, that rare scent of wet soil beginning to live again. June was already on her laptop, drafting a press statement with Aiko's help. Alma hauled hay to the new paddock, while Mateo hammered nails into a rebuilt fence. It wasn't a grand operation, just a handful of people doing honest work, but somehow it felt like revival. That evening, Beatrice stopped by again. She carried an envelope, sealed and heavy. "Old guilt money," she said simply. "From auction days. I want the fund to have it." Eli hesitated, then nodded. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "Some debts can't be paid with cash, but this'll start." After she left, he opened the envelope. Inside were crisp bills and a note written in neat cursive. For the ones who never got a chance to run free. He folded it carefully and tucked it beside the tin can that once held the map. That night, under the glow of a single bulb, June read out loud the messages flooding the Mercy Fund inbox. Letters from farmers, soldiers, teachers. Stories of loss and survival. Each one ended the same way. "We believe again." Eli listened, the weight of the day softening around him. Lumen stood in the stall behind him, dozing, his breath slow and even. "Dad?" June asked suddenly. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He looked toward the barn door, where the desert wind drifted in, cool and clean. "Yeah," he said. "I think we just keep showing up." She smiled. "That's not much of a plan." "Best ones never are." The lamp flickered, the night full of gentle sounds, horses shifting, frogs singing, the slow trickle of water through the ditch. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Not perfect, not permanent, just right. And when Eli stepped outside before turning in, he saw the sign June had painted and hung by the gate. "Mercy lives here." The words caught the moonlight, shining faintly, as if carved from the same stubborn hope that had driven a man to spend 5 cents on a forgotten horse. He reached up, tracing the letters with his hand. "Guess we made something after all," he murmured. Behind him, Lumen gave a soft nicker, almost an answer. The days that followed felt like borrowed time. The storms quieted, the air softened, and the desert, against all logic, began to bloom. Small shoots of green pushed through the cracks near the acequia, where water now trickled steady and clear. For the first time in years, the Mercer farm smelled of life instead of dust. Eli noticed the change in himself, too. The restless ache that had lived under his ribs since his wife's death had eased, replaced by a slower rhythm. He still rose before dawn, but not out of habit or guilt. Now he woke to the sound of hooves and birds, the whisper of June's voice narrating her new stories to the camera. Lumen had healed quickly. His coat gleamed silver in the sunlight, the scar under his mane fading to a thin line, like the seam of an old, scarred book. Every morning, he stood at the gate, waiting for Eli, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for the man's first word. June had turned the old shed into the Mercy Fund office, painting the walls pale yellow. The sign over the door read, "Kindness is the work." People came and went, volunteers, donors, drifters with stories to tell. Even the sheriff stopped by sometimes, not to talk business, but to sit under the cottonwood tree and breathe. Aiko arrived one afternoon with a stack of papers. "Your fund's now state certified," she said, smiling. "You're official." Eli stared at the forms, overwhelmed. "Didn't think Mercy needed a permit." Aiko laughed. "It doesn't. Bureaucracy does." Mateo fixed the last fence board that evening. When he hammered the final nail, the sound echoed like punctuation, a small but perfect ending. "Looks good," he said, stepping back. "Almost feels like peace." Eli looked around at the land glowing under the low sun. "Almost," he agreed. That night, the air carried the scent of rain, but no threat. June cooked supper, cornbread, beans, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They ate on the porch, the horizon stretched wide before them. Fireflies flickered in the field like scattered stars. "This feels like a dream," June said softly. Eli chewed thoughtfully. "Maybe it is. Dreams and Mercy, same family." When the plates were cleared, they stayed outside. The wind had gone gentle, brushing through the cottonwoods. Lumen grazed near the fence, his shadow long and calm against the fading light. June leaned back in her chair, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think Mom would have liked all this?" Eli didn't answer right away. He watched the horse lift his head, moonlight silvering his mane. "She would have said we finally stopped running," he said. "That we learned how to stand still." June smiled through the shimmer of tears. "You think that's the gift? Stillness?" He nodded slowly. "Stillness isn't emptiness. It's what's left when the noise dies down." The night deepened, and one by one the volunteers drifted home. The farm settled into quiet again, the kind that carries weight instead of loneliness. Eli went to the barn before turning in. The old lamp threw a soft gold over the stalls. Lumen was awake, ears flicked forward. Eli stepped closer, brushing his hand down the horse's neck. "You've done enough fighting," he murmured. "Time to rest." The horse lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently into Eli's shoulder. It was such a small gesture, but it filled the room with warmth. "I used to think mercy was something we gave," Eli whispered. "Turns out it's something that finds us." When he turned to go, he saw June's camera still recording from the corner shelf. An accidental capture. The lens glowed red in the half-dark, watching silently as father and horse shared a stillness that words could never hold. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window like honey. The farm looked washed clean of every sorrow it had ever known. Birds nested in the rafters. The rescued horses grazed in the distance, tails flicking lazily. June posted the recorded moment from the barn, Eli's voice soft, Lumen's breath fogging in the lamplight. Within hours, it reached hundreds of thousands of people. Comments flooded in. "That's what peace looks like." "I didn't know a story could make me feel whole again." "Mercy lives in the quiet." Eli didn't read any of them. He just sat on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the morning stretch out. June joined him, holding her phone. "They love you," she said. He smiled faintly. "They love what we all forget to love." "What's that?" "The part of life that don't ask for attention." They sat together until the sun rose fully, burning off the mist. Across the field, Lumen stood at the fence, tail swishing lazily, eyes half closed. June raised her camera again, but didn't hit record. Some things, she decided, didn't need to be shared. That evening, the volunteers gathered one last time before heading home for the season. They laughed, told stories, promised to return. Aiko stayed a little longer, helping June box up documents for the fund. Before she left, she said quietly to Eli, "You've built something rare. Don't forget it." After everyone was gone, Eli walked out to the fence. The wind had turned cool again, carrying the scent of grass and water. He rested his hands on the wood, watching the horses move like dark brushstrokes against the silver dusk. Lumen approached, his steps slow, certain. He stopped beside Eli, the two of them facing the wide, forgiving horizon. The last light of day lingered on their faces, man and horse carved by time, finally at ease. Eli reached out and stroked his neck. "We did all right," he said. The horse flicked his ear, as if agreeing. A long silence followed, steady, clean, full of everything that didn't need saying. The sky deepened to violet. Somewhere behind them, the wind chime Aiko had hung from the porch moved softly, one note at a time, blending with the hush of the land. The sound was no longer a reminder of fear. It was home. The summer settled in quietly that year, not with heat or noise, but with a kind of gentleness that made every sound feel like a memory. The sky above Clovis glowed soft and open, wide enough to hold both the past and what came after. The storms had gone, the land had dried, and everything that remained seemed washed and new. Eli woke before dawn, same as always. He brewed coffee, black and strong, then walked outside barefoot through the dew-dark grass. The world still held that fragile blue light that lives between night and morning. Across the field, Lumen grazed lazily, tail swishing, the first sun sparking off his silver coat. He leaned on the fence, watching the horse breathe, slow and even. "You remember when this place was nothing but dust?" he murmured. Lumen's ears flicked toward him, a soundless acknowledgement. Behind him, the door creaked open. June stepped out, hair loose, wearing her mother's old flannel. "You're up early again." "Never stopped," he said with a half-smile. "Old habits." She handed him a letter, its edges soft from travel. It came from Kentucky. Eli turned the envelope over. The handwriting was neat and sure, Ruthie Caldwell's. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet and a photograph. The picture showed a lush pasture at Blue Laurel Acres, newly rebuilt, horses grazing under a sky so green it looked unreal. At the bottom, Ruthie had written, "When the sun's right, we still see his shadow by the gate." He read the letter twice before folding it back. "She's rebuilding," June said. "Guess mercy travels faster than the wind," he replied. She smiled. "She invited us to visit." Eli looked at the land around them, the fences, the barn, the volunteers' new paddock in the distance. The fields were alive with color now. He shook his head softly. "Maybe one day, but we've still got our own work here." A breeze lifted, warm and steady, tugging at June's hair. She looked toward the hill, where the new sign stood, freshly painted and framed by the morning sun. 5-cent Sanctuary. The letters glowed pale gold against the wood, simple and sure. They'd held the dedication just 2 days earlier. A small crowd from town had come, standing in the shade of the cottonwoods while June read aloud a passage from her journal. "Mercy doesn't erase what happened. It builds a place for it to rest." People cried quietly, the way adults do when they've run out of ways to hide what they feel. Now the sanctuary stood as a home for the unwanted, the broken, the forgotten. Dozens of rescued horses grazed there, some blind, some scarred, all alive. Lumen was the calm center of it all, moving among them like a shadow made of light. Later that morning, Aiko stopped by with paperwork for the fund. "The state's giving you a grant," she said, laying the forms on the table. "Enough to keep the sanctuary open through next winter." Eli chuckled. 5 cents got us a long way. Aiko smiled, then nodded toward Lumen outside. "He's different lately." "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "He's lighter. Maybe we both are." She looked at him a moment longer. "You ever think mercy was always meant for you, not him?" He didn't answer, but the thought stayed with him long after she left. By midday, the sanctuary buzzed with quiet activity. Volunteers cleaning stalls, children brushing ponies, June filming a new piece for her growing channel. She spoke with a confidence Eli had never heard before. "When my father bought a horse for 5 cents, he didn't know he was buying a beginning," she said into the camera. "Mercy's like that. It starts small, but it never ends where you think it will." Eli listened from the barn doorway. He'd never said it out loud, but watching June now felt like watching the world make peace with itself. In the afternoon heat, he led Lumen out toward the ridge. They walked slow, side by side. The wind pressed against them, carrying the hum of grasshoppers and the faint sound of laughter from the volunteers down below. When they reached the top, Eli stopped, resting his hand on the horse's neck. From there he could see everything. The green fields, the shimmer of the acequia, the sanctuary, sign shining in the sun. "This is where she wanted to scatter her ashes," he said softly, his eyes on the horizon. "Said she wanted to ride the wind one last time." The breeze picked up again, brushing past his cheek. He pulled a small tin from his coat pocket, the same one that once held a map, a photograph, and 3 old secrets. Now it held the fine, pale dust of what used to be grief. He opened it, letting the ashes lift, carried into the light. For a long time, he stood there, his hand still open, the wind tugging at his sleeve. Lumen turned his head toward the same horizon, eyes soft, unafraid. "Guess we all go home somehow," Eli murmured. When they came down from the ridge, the day had turned warm and gold. June waved from the paddock, her voice bright. "Dad, the new mare's foaling!" He smiled and quickened his pace. Inside the barn, the volunteers had gathered, their faces glowing with excitement. The mare lay breathing hard, and within minutes, a small, trembling foal slipped into the straw. A light chestnut with a thin white blaze down her nose. Lumen stepped closer, lowering his head until it touched the foal's neck. June wiped her eyes. "First one born at the sanctuary." Eli crouched beside the newborn, hand resting on the damp, tiny chest. "She's a good sign," he said quietly. "What'll you name her?" June asked. He looked at the foal, then at the wind moving through the open door, stirring the dust into golden threads. "Sign," he said. "She's the sign that mercy don't die easy." That night, when the sun sank and the stars spilled across the sky, Eli walked alone to the porch. The wind chime Aiko had hung months ago sang softly in the dark. It no longer carried fear. It sounded like home, like memory made gentle. He sat down with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the fields shimmer under moonlight. Lumen stood at the far fence, still as a sentinel, the foal sleeping near his legs. June joined him quietly. "I posted the final video," she said. "The story's finished." Eli shook his head. "Stories like this don't finish. They just change hands." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need words. Then a gust swept across the fields, making the chime ring once, clear and strong. Eli looked toward the sound, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hear that, Lumen? That's her. That's the sign." The horse lifted his head, ears turned toward the wind, as if answering. And for the first time since the day he'd bought a broken horse for 5 cents, Eli Mercer felt that everything, loss, love, mercy, had finally found its place. The wind moved through the land again, carrying with it the scent of rain and grass and something softer still. It sounded like peace. If this story touched something in you, drop a simple 1 in the comments, just to let us know you felt it too. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next stories of love, loss, and the quiet bond between people and the horses who save them. Sometimes mercy starts with just one small act, maybe even 5 cents.